What is going on, my modern leaders? Welcome to our Business Leadership Book Club. We are diving into extreme ownership. This is part 3 today. If you missed any parts of these, I'll leave you the link in the description for some of the past ones. We meet every Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific time with the 875 plus business owners who are looking to develop not only their leadership, their influence, and their impact, but by doing so without having to sacrifice family time or burning themselves out. So guys, welcome to Modern Leadership, where we see things differently. We help entrepreneurs become modern leaders so they can excel both personally and professionally without burning themselves out or sacrificing family time. And we do that. One of the ways we do that is through this Business Leadership Book Club. Right now, it's completely free. If you are just watching this and you've never even seen us before, definitely sign up for the actual information, which is inside of the description, so that you can get access to the free app and know when these calls are going to be and basically have all the replays that we've ever done. So we are diving into Extreme Ownership Part 3. Today, we're going to start off on chapter number 4. Now, I have to say, Extreme Ownership, this book, every single time I read it, it's like I'm reading it with a new set of eyes. Right now, I have a brand new puppy. He is 9.5, 10 maybe weeks old. And I got to tell you, like, extreme ownership is something that puppy is trying to teach me. He's trying to teach me to control the things that I can control. Yesterday, he decided that the inside of the house was going to be his potty yard and not the outside of the house, which he had been doing so well. And then one led to another, and it totally got me frustrated. And I reminded myself, bro, you got this book. Let's lean into it, because when we can control the things we can control, we can even control the things that we can't. So today, woke up a little bit different on the other side of the bed, and I'm really leaning into these principles, and we're going to dive into some more of them here today. But as we go, I always want to hear your feedback from the book, from the parts that I'm talking about, because I really feel like there's so much more exponential growth when you grow as a team rather than just hearing one person's perspective, okay? All right, so we're diving into chapter number 4. Chapter number 4 is titled Check the Ego. Now, I'm not going to go into the very specific stories in every single one of these chapters. That's why I want you to read them. It's so awesome to be able to read them. But I want to point out some of the things that really stood out to me. And what's crazy is these are things that are different that stood out with me last time. I did not highlight any of these areas last time, but they really stood out to me because when you're reading a book, depending on where you are in your personal journey, specific things will call out to you. And that's also why I like to do this as a team, because other things will call out to different people. And it's basically bringing it into our awareness. So in this chapter, they were talking about how when they were in Ramadi, there was this group of really high level, I think it was either, special operations units, where they were coming in and they really weren't checking their ego. They thought that they were the best. They thought that they were just going to do things on their own. They weren't going to communicate with everybody else. Hey, one of those things where, oh, you want the information from us? Well, we'll tell you when you need to know it, right? And through that process, he said that he sent over, Amber, good morning, good morning. He sent over some people to meet up with them to really catch them up to speed and do what they could to really help. And he said one of his SEALs was a little nervous, thinking that, you know what, these people, they're so good at what it is that they do that they could come over and take off some of the missions from us. Maybe we shouldn't really help them out in to the full capacity that we're able to, so that we can still have some missions to go to as well. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is he pointed outside and he said, the enemy is out there. The enemy isn't in here. The enemy is out there. This really connected with me because my brain goes into, how many times are we fighting internal battles when the enemy is out there? And in reality, when we aren't getting along really well, when we are all focused on each other internally and have this internal conflict, we kind of miss out on the actual war that's going on the outside, right? Whether that's your competition, whether that's the pain that you help people solve, all of those things, when you're doing and dealing with all the issues inside and you're not willing to check your ego, you forget about the mission that is outside the lines, right? He likes to call it your enemy. But in reality, this could be anything. It could be anything that's against you. It could be the problem that you're trying to solve. Any time that you're spending extra time worrying about what's going on inside, not checking your ego, overcomplicating situations, fighting internally, you're not solving the problem on the outside. And that problem is starting to take over even more. And so that's what really connected with me with this principle of the ego. He says on page 100, he says, the ego clouds and disrupts everything. The planning process, the ability to take good advice, and the ability to accept constructive criticism. It even stifles someone's sense of self-preservation. Often the most difficult ego to deal with is your own. That one is so powerful. He says, everyone has an ego. Ego drives the most successful people in life, but it also can make things become really destructive. He said, implementing extreme ownership requires checking your ego and operating with a degree of humility. Admitting mistakes, taking ownership, and developing a plan to overcome challenges are integral to any successful team. Ego can prevent a leader from conducting an honest, realistic assessment of his or her own performance and the performance of the team. Let me explain to you how this is like literally propping up to my head saying I need to like take more extreme ownership, especially of my puppy, right? Because it's very easy for me to point to the outside and say, well, he didn't do this or he didn't do that. Like, what's wrong? Why isn't he doing this? And in reality, all I can do is control what I can control. And thinking like I'm the person who's feeding him, I'm the person that he should be following and all that kind of stuff. That is pure ego. And instead I can lean in and say, you know what do I have to learn from this situation? What can I do to set him up for success? And when I think in those terms, it actually reminds me like a couple days ago when he was doing really well, it's because I was controlling that. And Teresa was saying, man, you are the most patient person ever, right? And when I was that patient person, when I was being the leader that my puppy needed, he was actually taking my advice and, doing the things that I truly wanted him to do. And then when he stopped doing those things, I started to not meet him where he needed me to meet him, not be the leader that he wanted to be. This is the same way with our business. One of the things, one of the stories that he has in here was about somebody who he was the leader of a team, leader of a business, and the person did not take the actions that he had wanted him to take. And Jocko was talking to him and said, well, do you think that he took those actions to purposefully sabotage the business? And the boss was like, no, I don't think he took those actions to purposefully sabotage. Then he's like, well, it sounds like you're having a personal attack on your ego. Like you wanted him to do this and you told him and he did something else entirely different. And now it feels like an attack on your ego. Randall, good morning, sir. And so when it feels like it's an attack on your ego, that's when the battle starts to happen. But he said, what you really need to do is you really need to take ownership of the things that you can control. And he said, ownership of what? And Jocko says, ownership of everything. This isn't his fault. It's yours. You're in charge. So that fact that he didn't follow procedure is actually your fault. And you have to believe that because it's true. When you talk to him, you need to start the conversation like this. Our team made a mistake and it's my fault. It's my fault because I obviously wasn't clear as I should have been in explaining why these procedures in place and how not following them can cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was actually in a coaching one-on-one session with somebody and they were struggling with like communicating with somebody after they had this real belief that like, not a belief, but the person didn't do something that they had wanted them to do. And it's very easy. This is how you know when the ego will take over. It's very easy because when you see that you're getting angry or resentful or upset or frustrated because of it, that means number one, you're not taking ownership, but also that you're not checking your ego, right? You're meaning it's a personal attack against you. Like the ego is there to defend you, really. And when you feel like you're being personally attacked, that's when your ego wants to shout out the most, right? And instead, I was talking to her and I'm like, well, let's think about this way. Let's say that you did something, right? And your boss came up to you and was like, why did you do that? And they were all accusatory. Would you be open to doing something a little different? And they were like, well, no, I wouldn't be open to that. And so I was like, okay, what if your boss came and said, you know what? Like, this is my fault. I should have done a much better job of explaining this to you because this is the reasons behind why we want to do it this way. And this is what's going to happen when we don't. But I accept full responsibility of this. And I want to make sure that I really verbalize it to you so you completely understand. Does that make sense? And how likely do you think the person's going to be willing to receive that? And then this happens 99 times out of 100 whenever I've done this, whether it's police work, whether it's online coaching, whether it's in our push coach certification. Like whenever I do that, people are always like, no, this was my fault. Like I shouldn't have done this. And the reason why that is because when you're modeling the ability of taking and checking your ego, they're going to model that ability themselves. But when you're attacking because you're defending your ego, guess what happens? They defend their ego. Even if, like, maybe they don't attack you like how you're attacking them, but I promise you the internal dialogue that they're having in their brain is a personal attack, and they lose some respect from you, right? So that's why chapter number 4, such a powerful one, is really being able to lean in and check your ego. And like I said, for me personally, how I know when it's kind of showing up is either I'm making it mean something about me when somebody does something, or I start to feel angry or frustrated or like disrespected because I have like a certain expectation that they have to follow because, for example, like I'm my kid's dad, so they should respect me. Well, that is a big ego thing. Like I do want them to respect me, but also at the same time, if they don't, like I'm not going to get angry or frustrated or upset. At least I try not to. I'm going to try and teach them, give them a teachable moment by also like respecting them, right? Can you imagine if somebody's not respecting you and then you disrespect them? Now you're literally modeling the behavior of going back and forth, right? And instead, bringing it down, checking your ego, being the first person to check your ego, and then lean into, yeah, you're right, that was my fault. Like I should have done a better job of explaining this, right? That's you taking extreme ownership. And 99 times out of 100, the person, if they're going to be somebody who's a moldable leader, right, they're going to be willing to do that with you too. So that was a powerful chapter. Really wanted to touch on that one, especially because it's like actually hitting home with me right now with my puppy. And Julie, good morning. Good morning, Julie. Okay. So let's move on to chapter number 5. By the way, if you have a team or you have a takeaway from chapter number 4, I do want to hear it in the chat. Julie says, I love this chapter. So good. That internal war connected with me as well. Yes, it's this internal like kind of battle. And you forget that the war is on the outside, right? I think this is also like a way of self-sabotage, honestly. I feel like my ego has sabotaged so many things that now I'm more open to checking my ego because I'm like, man, I've sabotaged so many things, not only in my business, in relationships, in the police field, like all this kind of stuff. I mean, just a perfect example. I go to somebody's house, somebody's like going into their house for a radio call, right? How likely am I to get their compliance if I'm just barking orders versus me going in there and being open to hearing what's going on and like really listening to them and being okay if somebody yells at me or says something and I'm just like cool and calm and collected, right? The opposite I've seen where somebody does that, this person gets angry and upset and then the officer gets angry and upset and it just escalates higher, right? It's a lot about checking that ego too. All right, chapter number 5. Chapter number 5 is called Cover and Move. This is really about teamwork. All right. Really about teamwork. One of the things that I took from this story, which all of these chapters have incredible stories. I mean, they're war-based stories, but you can really see like how the universal principles apply in multiple different situations. But this really is life or death. And if it works in life or death, it's going to work in other situations too. One of the things that they were doing is they were trying to make a decision. Should we do this or should we do that? And one of the things he said, no options are good, but our least bad option is to do this. Have you ever been in a situation where you had that? Where you've had to make a decision and you're like, there really is no great decision? Well, guess what? As a leader, you have to make some decision, even if it's the least bad option. Right? And when we instead don't make a decision, when we don't take that extreme ownership, when we don't like really think it out, and really what he's doing, he's also getting this feedback from other people in his unit. He's not just making the decision himself, but he's making a decision rather than not making a decision at all, right? So sometimes not all the options are going to be good, right? Not all the options are going to be perfect, right? So he says no options were good, so we had to choose the least bad option. And so what they decided to do is they did this process called cover and move. And what cover and move is, if you've never been in the military or as a police officer, we use it as well as a police officer, is when one person's moving, like moving forward towards a specific goal, the other person's covering, meaning they're looking out, they're waiting to see if like the enemy or something is going to pop up, right? And then when this person sets in the front, then this person behind, they move and they usually leapfrog past them to the next barrier. And then this person's covering while this person is moving. We also did this with paintball too. So like if you're in a paintball tournament, like covering and moving is really critical, because if you're both moving or you're both covering, you're not progressing and making and like really bringing it like how you have to bring it to get the flag or to do whatever your mission is. But also if you're both going at the same time, you're both exposed, right? And so that's this process of cover and move. But when he got back there, when he got back to home base, right? They had to engage with the enemy. They had to do a whole bunch of stuff. When they got back, one of the head SEALs was like, why didn't you ask us to help cover you while you were coming back to the base? And he said that when he told him that, he said, why didn't you leave the other SEAL sniper overwatch protection in place to cover your movement back to the COP? So basically he was asking him like, yeah, okay, you guys did cover and move, but why didn't you leave the second platoon that was out there that could have covered you so that you would have even more of an impact to get back here? You would have used even more teamwork. And he said, I thought about that a moment. My initial defensiveness wore off. He was right. He said, no reason. He's like, this was the first rule in Jocko's law of combat, cover and move. And I had broken it. We had used cover and move within my own immediate team, but I had forgotten about the greater team and the support that was available. We had operated independently, failing to support or help each other out. This is my biggest takeaway from this chapter. We can think about like how we cover and move and how we like really help each other out in the small micro, but we've also got to think about it in the more bigger macro, right? Sometimes we forget that like this is a team sport. Life is a team sport, especially as a human. It's not an individual thing, right? And so the more that we can ask for help, the more that we can actually help each other cover and move, the more that we're going to be able to be more successful in the long term, right? And the initial thought of like, hey, I'm going to be able to do it just within this specific area, that's a great start. But also, like, how could you expand that even further? How can you get more people involved? It's like saying, hey, we're going to do this just as a unit, but how can you get patrol involved? How could you get other people that are involved, right? I remember when we used to go on like tactical things where we do like probation and parole searches, it would be our unit, it would be patrol, it would be probation, it would be like additional people, right? There would be other people from the FBI and all of these different task force because we weren't just like this one unit. We now had all of these like resources because we were able to bring even more people together. So that's one of those things where I think about this a lot is like how many different types and groups of people could I bring together to accomplish this mission rather than just thinking about it to myself. One of the things you're going to see, and you probably have seen it recently, is our thumbnails for this channel, for the YouTube channel, are changing. And that's because we're taking on different team members so that we can cover and move, all right? So we have like Kurt, who's like really rocking the editing of the videos. We have me and Teresa, who's recording the actual videos and also turning them into podcasts, right? But primarily they're videos here on YouTube. Now we have Sneha, who's like literally thinking about the entire process, coming up with an ideation and then putting a thumbnail together that's going to attract people to actually get them to click on it. I have Nais on the back end, sending messages to people on social media, posting stuff up there to get more people to come to our YouTube channel. And so it's the collaboration of all these things. It's the cover and move from everything that really gets people not only to be in their strength zone, but also to cover us in our weakness zone. And that's really what the power of cover and move is to make sure that you're playing to your strength, which is the team in numbers, right? I remember as a police officer, you say, we don't fight fair, right? It's the power of numbers, but also like having some people to help you through your weaknesses, right? Is critical as well. All right, let's see. Application to business. They have another story in here that was talking about these two different companies. They were under the same umbrella of this huge company, but they were kind of like two subsidiaries. And they were like, they were kind of like fighting at each other because they were like, this person's too slow. This one person isn't showing up the way they need to. And they were kind of like arguing. And this is a great opportunity for him to say, hey, guess what, guys? Like the fight is out there. Like the war is out there. The enemy is out there. You guys are in here fighting and squabbering. Like, what if you just communicated and figured out like how to actually work best as an entire team? And then you could bring the fight to the enemy out there. That's your competitors, the people who are taking your business right now because you're too busy fighting. And so by doing this, he was actually able to make them both come together, and they both realized, and this is such an aha moment, this is why life coaching is such a powerful tool, is when you use the power of questions and you give people the ability of like just being curious and having conversations, you find out about the other person's perspective and it totally shifts yours. I'm not saying that like it'll totally change everything from you 180, but how many times have you guys had, some information, right? And then you just have a conclusion yourself. And then you get more information and more information. And then you find out this happened and this happened and this happened. And now you're like, my perspective totally changed now, right? Because you were able to get more information. And that's how communicating this way, that's how covering and moving, and that's how working together as a team can really impact you when it comes to creating like the success that you want towards your mission, but also like the teamwork that it takes to get there. And I got to tell you, like when you do that, It's one of these things where it creates a culture of teamwork, a culture of ownership. And I got to tell you, like when you're creating other leaders instead of other followers, it's just a total game changer. Emery says, I like when they swapped the leaders during Hell Week and how the dynamics changed. 100%, Emery. That was back in chapter 1, 100%. Isn't it crazy how just like a leader, one little shift in a leader can literally impact the entire team? And what's funny is like when they made that shift, the other team who was the worst got up to the first, but this team still was able to perform. You know why? Because they had a leader who had modeled the behavior for them. Now it doesn't matter who the leader is, they're still able to keep up with that, right? I definitely love that takeaway for sure. Okay, chapter number 6. This is the last one for today. Chapter number 6 is simple. Simple, simple. This, my friends, is my kryptonite. You ever have that where like you just want to overcomplicate things? You just want to like have all the details from A to Z, fill in every single blank, have all of it before you even start? Or in the process, like you start to try and communicate to other people, right? Because in your brain, maybe there's a lot of different steps and you try to communicate to other people and you try to give them like this massive amount of steps and then they're not able to succeed with it. And that's because we like overcomplicate it. He had a situation in here where they did the exact same thing, where they had just secured a specific base and they were doing their first like kind of field patrol and they were going to walk out of their like behind their defenses and be able to like go through this like area because they kind of wanted to show their force. And the commander who was in charge of that squad had like this intricate like deal. He's going to go here and then here and then here and then here and then here. And Jocko was like, wait, like you're going into like multiple different other companies, areas. Like we don't have a way to communicate with them. You're talking about going this direction and this direction. Like we're not going to know exactly where you are. And there's so many different variables here. Like I think we need to just keep it simple. Let's go out, come around, and then come back. And he explained it to the guy, and the guy wasn't really super excited about it. He was like, hey, but we want to do all these things. But Jocko knew that he had been in that situation, in that kind of urban warfare, and that they were going to run into some problems right when they got out there. And so he said, let's just keep it super simple, right? And so as a result, they went out, they did get attacked, and they did need to call in the tanks, and they did need to go and find them. But if they had gotten themselves to where they had initially intended and had like made it more complicated, Jocko says, I don't know if we would have been able to like get there in time before the whole entire unit was wiped out. And he said when the guy got back, that they basically like met eyes, and the guy's like, okay, now I know what you mean, right? Because we could really overcomplicate it, especially like when we're trying to do something for the first time. And I think that's also the power of having a leader over you who says, let's simplify this, right? Because I know for us people who are like in business, the confused buyer doesn't buy. If you're like, there's 7 different things that you could buy, they're going to buy none. The most amount that I would ever say is like 2, because if you have 2, it's like this one or this one, and it gets them to go like in that binary direction, this one or this one. But if you start getting 3, 4, 5, 10 different things, they're not going to, because they're going to be confused and not know what right thing to do, right? So the simpler we can make it, the better. He says, the principle is combat, like anything in life, has inherent layers of complexities. Simplifying as much as possible is crucial to success. When plans and orders are too complicated, people may not understand them. And when things go wrong, and they inevitably do go wrong, complexity compounds issues that can spiral out of control into total disaster. He says leaders must encourage this communication and take the time to explain so that every team member understands. And if every team member doesn't understand, then that might mean that your situation is a little bit too complex. The story that they gave in here was a story about, I guess there was like a commission structure that a business was changing. And what they decided to do is they decided to like give a certain percentage for a certain amount of widget that was sold, a certain percentage for another widget that was sold, and the person who had 15% more of the other person got another 25%. And basically it made it so confusing that the people didn't know what to sell. They had no idea what to do. And they were like, I don't know how I actually got this bonus, this amount of money, but like it's really confusing and I don't know what to focus on. And so when he went to the CEOs and he started talking to them like, hey, tell me a little bit about this structure. He said it was so complicated that he couldn't understand it. And he's like, if this is complicated for us, it's complicated for your people, and they're not going to see what they can do to actually, make more money, but also make more sales in the business. So instead, what if we simplify this? What if we keep it as simple as possible? And yes, there can be some intricacies, but we don't want to get so far that people are so confused they don't know what to do. This is the same thing that also situations and stuff that happen as a police officer too. When you overcomplicate things, it like just throws too many variables into it. And when there's too many variables, it never turns out right. So the more simple we can get, the better. He said in this specific instance, the CEOs were kind of a little bit frustrated by it, but they said, you know what, we'll go back and we'll redesign it. They redesigned it, made it super simple, brought it to the people. They understood it, and it actually helped them actually make more money in their business because of how simple it was. They knew, the people knew, the salesman knew, if I did this, I'll get more money. If I did this, I won't get so much money. And when you can keep it simple like that, people are going to lean in and do those things that they can do to actually fulfill the mission, and it's going to help the entire team. So anytime you're doing something, you're putting something together, you're having a new offer, you're going to make a pitch for somebody, keep it as simple as possible. If it gets too complicated, and here's the thing, like this is also the curse of like coaching and the curse of like you being able to be at the place that you're at right now, right? A lot of us as business owners, we have like things that we've struggled through, and now we've gotten to the other side. Sometimes we think it's less complicated, but if we think about the old version of us, it was like, this is way too complicated. I would have never known what that information was. I mean, I actually experience it right now. Sometimes on some of my YouTube videos, like I'm talking to a very specific group of entrepreneurs, but sometimes the coach in me starts to come out and I start talking about limiting beliefs and the subconscious mind and this and that. And like, boop, people are gone. They're like off of the video, right? Because I've totally lost them with talking in that language, right? And so it's a way of like, how can we keep this simple so that people like everybody really, truly understands, and people appreciate that when they're able to understand it. All right, guys, those are the 3 chapters. Next week, we're going to dive into what's the next chapter. It is chapter number 7, prioritize and execute. This is my favorite one, guys, for anytime that you are overwhelmed, anytime that you're frustrated because you didn't get enough stuff done. This chapter is super powerful. What I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and get through 7, 8, and 9 by next Thursday. But I also want to hear from you guys. Before we go, what was your biggest takeaway, whether from reading these parts of the book or from the call that we just, what I just said right now? What is your biggest takeaway? And what are maybe some ways that you can move forward with this in the future? Maybe an area of your life that you think that you can lean into. I want to hear you in the comment section. Randall says, I've realized to let go of my ego before a conversation I know is going to be challenging. In conversations involving egos, we play the war of matched elevated emotion. Randall, that is next level thinking. I'm so glad that you're there because you're 100% right. And when you let down the ego, it's much more likely that the other person will let down the ego too. Will it happen 100% of the time? No, but I promise you, you bring your ego, it's going to be much harder for them to let go. And you can't really have a conversation with your ego. Like if your ego's there, it's not really a conversation. It's more of like let me tell you the way it is, right? Let me do this because I said so, that kind of stuff. And it doesn't really connect with people, and people don't really respect you. So I'm so glad that you're at that level, Randall. That's awesome. All right. What other takeaways you guys have? What other takeaways you guys have? I want to hear. And then we'll jump into, actually, we'll end the call after that. What was your biggest takeaway? What was your biggest takeaway? I think for mine was the whole check the ego, especially while working with a puppy. I feel like when it comes to checking my ego, it really is helpful when I come in with like a more of a curiosity in terms of why he did this versus why he didn't do that. That makes me lower my stress. And when I lower my stress, my puppy lowers his stress too. Okay, guys. Appreciate you so much for being here. Thank you so much. I appreciate you for being a part of the Modern Leadership Book Club. Next week, we are going to be launching something super powerful. I can't give you all the details on that. It's going to be a special community here inside of YouTube. It's going to have access to like a live call, a live Q&A, and a whole bunch of other things. And Julie says, thank you, Randall. Good point. I will use this with ongoing communication with the family members. Keep an eye on my ego and emotions, 100%. All right, guys. You guys have a powerful weekend, and I look forward to seeing you guys really soon, okay? All right, bye, team.